So that brings us to Nancy Borman's program coordinator. And then you can go ahead and introduce our speaker for tonight if you like.
Okay, I will do that. Perhaps we can get Justin on while can I be on the side and Justin? There we go. There's Justin. I'd like to.
Okay, you unmuted him.
Okay, hi.
Hi, it's welcome, Justin, to our meeting. And thank you so much for joining us and taking time from your busy schedule to be with us. I'd just like to introduce you to our group. Justin attended Virginia Tech University, where he graduated with a degree in marketing in 2003. But after 6 years in the business world, Justin decided that he needed something that would give him a little more satisfaction. So he began looking for a new career, and he decided on physical therapy and quit his business job in 2008, juggled multiple part-time jobs and his academic schedule and his new baby girl, where he was a stay-home dad. And finally, in May of 2012, Justin graduated with a doctorate of physical therapy from Newman University, and was happy to join the Prana team, physical therapy team. And he's been learning and applying functional manual therapy and incorporating them into the treatment of his patients. In his spare time, Justin is an avid runner and is often seen running around the west end of Lancaster City or the trails of the county park. He is also an avid gardener, a foodie, amateur foodie, and a budding ice cream maker. He's the proud father of 3 beautiful children, Kristen, Ella, and Ethan. And his wife, Sarah, he says, is obviously the best thing that ever happened to him. They all live in the west end of Lancaster City, and we're very happy to have them. I have Justin tonight as our presenter. And I just need to give a personal testimonial. I don't know if you remember this, Justin, but probably 5 years or more ago, you treated me and put me back together after I overstressed my knee, because I was determined that if I just kept cross-country skiing, I would get better. Only I didn't. I got really worse until the doctor said, no, you're not going to do any more of that for the season. And Justin put me back together. So I just want to give a testimonial to you, Justin, personally, for the care that you gave me, and also the fact that I haven't had to go back. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes. So I'll turn it over to you, and thank you so much for being with us.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Also take that moment to say thanks for that nice introduction. And Bill Stein, I am happy to see you still have that Christmas tree up there. That's a great display right now.
It is very pretty.
It will probably be coming down in a day or two.
Okay. Boy, let's see. I'm going to, there we go. All right. So I'm actually repurposed the talk that I gave a little while ago. It was very well received, made a few changes to make it a little more applicable to cross-country skiing. But I think you guys will all learn something from this evening. So first of all, I do have some experience with cross-country skiing. Primarily, yes, I am a runner, but a couple of years ago, there was a big storm coming to Lancaster. And I was like, hey, if ever there's a time, this is the time. So I checked Craigslist. Sure enough, I found a whole set of used cross-country skis and boots and poles and everything. I'm literally driving home from picking this up, and the snow starts to fall. And we ended up getting nearly 3 feet here in the city. There was a snow emergency declared. And so and then there was a driving ban in the city. So for like 2 nights in a row, I'm skiing up and down like Chestnut Street, Walnut Street, all around, because nobody was out. And there's just this great street for cross-country skiing. It was fantastic. I haven't had an experience like that since, though. So tonight, though, I just wanted to talk about movement and why that matters. And as cross-country skiers, you can appreciate how important movement is. And I did a little bit of research too, and cross-country skiing is fairly well researched because of its like basically the fountain of youth. Like of all sports out there, that is the one that they have found that people well into their 80s still have cardiovascular health and musculoskeletal health as those much younger. And more research continue to come out about that. So that's really impressive. So here, this is not actually me, but you had mentioned earlier, yes, I am a father, but it's actually 4 kids now. I have 4 children. So if you hear things running around upstairs, it's getting closer to bedtime. So my wife is wrestling them. And I will add, it is a little more stressful with virtual school during a pandemic with 4 kids. It's been quite the struggle, but we're getting by. So this here is actually Meb Keflezighi. He's an Olympic marathoner. And one year he was on the cover of Runner's World, and my oldest daughter thought it was me. I was like, wow, I'm going to forever cherish that compliment. But that is not actually me. Like I said, running is my main passion, but I love cross-country skiing and endurance sport in general. So let's talk about how movement may even be medicinal for a broken healthcare system. So as I said earlier, cross-country skiing is very heavily researched. And one study that I came across, they actually had 73,000 participants over a 10-year period. And what they were looking at is, what are just like all-cause mortality risk factors? You know, these are people even had a history of cancer, a history of heart disease. And what they were finding, people who even picked up cross-country skiing later in life were basically able to reverse some of these negative effects of these chronic illnesses. America in general is not really the most healthy in the world scene. We don't all agree on why. Some people say it's because of diet, lack of exercise. But one thing that we can all agree on is we are not getting healthier, and the expenses involved with taking care of us all is growing exponentially. So just a couple statistics on this now. 1 in 3 children are obese in the US by their 5th birthday. You know, 63% increase in depression and anxiety among teens. Now, this is all pre-COVID. You know, COVID, I'm sure, is affecting this even more so, and it's sad, but those studies won't be out for a long while yet. And the obesity rate, one interesting thing, well, many interesting things, but between 1980 and 2012, the obesity rate nearly tripled. Type 2 diabetes, which can be linked heavily to diet. There was pretty much 0 cases of type 2 diabetes in adolescents prior to 1980. And as of 2010, there's nearly 58,000 reported cases of this. So then there's also the increasing rate of osteoporosis. And we'll get to that a little bit later, because cross-country skiing is great at protecting against the negative effects of osteoporosis. Now, statistics, granted, can be deceiving. So this here is just a kind of funny, spurious relationship. So we really probably can't say that the per capita cheese consumption correlates with the number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bed sheets. We could all agree, though, that that is quite the movement disorder, if that is the case here. I was surprised that you see that the number of deaths that actually did occur in 2009. So this is a real chart here, a real statistic. But again, we can't always say that this was the cause of that. And so that's why I'm saying we can't just rely on numbers alone. So now let's look at, again, moving our bodies as medicine. And let's take a moment right now and just do a self-assessment. As you're all sitting there listening to this presentation, does anything hurt? Does anything feel tight? You know, just kind of taking a mental assessment here of what's going on. Did you take vitamin I this morning? I jokingly refer to ibuprofen as vitamin I, because some people, they just take that as if it's a vitamin and it's okay. It's going to mitigate any pain that they may have. Have you ever thought about the relationship between the posture that you have and the pain that might be associated with it? So gravity, it's unrelenting. Every day is having an impact on our bodies, and it could be positive, it could be negative. This here is just kind of showing the extreme effects of posture, right? If you're sitting, working at a computer, you may be sitting at a computer well. Here, I've just pulled this picture showing that someone, maybe they're getting tired late in the day, head starts to slump forward, putting an extra strain on their back and their neck. Meanwhile, the person on my right here, she's got a very heavy load, arguably stacked up on her head, but notice her neck posture and her back posture, being able to tolerate all that as it goes throughout her spine all the way down into her feet. This here is an interesting poster. It was a full-page ad several years ago in the Washington Post. And I know you won't be able to see all of this here, but I just really wanted to emphasize how this is such a growing topic. This idea, is sitting the new smoking? Because here they're looking at all the negative effects that can occur with chronic sitting or prolonged sitting, more than 8 hours a day. We as a culture, we're really good at exercising the 3 C's when it comes to sitting. That's the car, the chair, and the couch. So here you can see it as you're sitting there for a long period of time. And again, I don't want to come across as a guy who's just anti-sitting. I recognize we got to be able to sit and we got to be able to relax too. But this here is just really showing some of those negative effects of sitting for long periods of time. It can cause brain fog. It can result in some heart issues, some bone decay. And what I'm, again, coming back to is, how can we fight against this? Are there any changes that maybe we could make, even on a small level, that could help to reverse some of the negative effects that may be the result of sitting for too long? And speaking of sitting too long or being inactive in general, there's a classic study done back in the 60s. It's known as the Dallas Bed Rest Study. And so what they did is they took 5 20-year-old men, they were college students, and they put them on bed rest for 3 weeks. So the rules of this study were you can watch anything, read anything, listen to anything, but you can't get out of bed. I think you can get out of bed to go to the bathroom, but that was it. They're eating in bed, sleeping in bed. And the changes that they found were remarkable. They were following what would happen with their cardiovascular health in this. And after 3 weeks of just lying around, the impact of this was significant. There was a 26% decline in VO2 max. And also, I should note that cross-country skiing athletes tend to have the highest, or one of the highest, VO2 maxes out of all sports. So just after 3 weeks, you were seeing this significant decline. The same levels, that same level of decline was not seen again until they had aged another 40 years. So basically, after 3 weeks, they saw this decline. They put them back on an exercise routine to bring them back up to baseline. But then that decline did not happen again for 40 years of just living their life, which is good news. But it's also bad news because it shows the power of just being inactive. They were also able, I should back up and say, so these participants, they've then had to do 10-year follow-up studies. So every 10 years, they come back into the lab and they analyze, things like their cardiovascular health. And then at the 30-year mark, they actually put them on an exercise regime for a 6-week period. And as you can see here on the slide, the numbers that were yielded from that, the positive health benefits of being on an active exercise routine, basically brought their cardiovascular health numbers back to as if they were 20 years ago. So again, it was like the exercise was the fountain of youth for them. Okay, so now let's do a quick participation break. Now I can't see everybody, but so this is going to be honor system. You're just going to do this on your own. I just want to have everyone stand up, and I want you to just do a squat from where you are right now. You just stand up, you squat as low as you feel you can, be as comfortable as you are with that. Again, I'm not judging. This is all honor system. I'm not watching. This is, again, coming back to that statement that I made earlier. Does anything hurt? Is anything tight? So how did you feel with that? Can you give everybody a second to get comfortable, get back again? All right, so now this picture here, This is the Prime Minister of Singapore when he was 67. So this was taken from a couple of years ago. Now, did your squat that you just did right now look like that? Again, I'm not judging. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. So you would also say, why is this even important? But this was actually a front page story for the Atlantic magazine. They just thought it was amazing that you have a 67-year-old being able to drop down, deep squat, heels on the ground, having a cell phone out in front of him to take a picture. So this right here is an example of positive stress, right? I was saying earlier that gravity is just unrelenting and it can have a negative effect on us. So here's an example of somebody from an Eastern culture where squatting is the norm. You know, beds are on the floor, toilets are on the ground, they wait for buses in a squatted position. So they're using it or losing it, right? So here they're able to squat down. He's using it, therefore not losing it. I'll also note that in many Eastern cultures, the incidence of falls is far lower. And some argue it's because they've maintained that joint integrity. They have the joint health, they have the mobility, they have strength because they're moving through a full range of motion frequently. So now, what on earth would that have to do with an orca? I'm glad you're asking that. So here we have a killer whale. Top left, this is one taken from the wild, a picture of one taken in the wild. And then on the bottom right are two that were taken in captivity. So you'll notice the dorsal fin of that killer whale on the top left there. It's nice and straight, strong, upright. The two down here on the bottom right, they're curled a little bit over to the side. And the reason for that is a killer whale, when it's in the wild, it has to swim at fast speeds. It has to swim at greater depths. It has to jump to try and get its prey. In captivity, they're swimming in shallower waters. Their food is provided to them. So again, this is another example of use it or lose it. You know, they're put under these stressors here. Again, this is positive stress of having to swim quickly, to swim to get its food. And therefore, its joints and its collagen, its soft tissues, they're more robust, they're more strong and sturdy. Whereas the ones on the bottom right, not so much. Therefore, basically gravity is influencing that and those dorsal fins are falling over. You can see how this may have an impact on individuals who have injured themselves with low levels of activity, right? Again, cross-country skiing, you're using your bodies on a regular basis, putting it through some positive stress. Therefore, you're able to take the environmental stressors placed upon you, and you're going to be less likely to break a leg with a fall. And so this leads to the question then, if movement is medicinal, then why don't we do more of it? So maybe we don't even take it, or we take it for granted too much that movement is something that is medicine. It is like a medication. There should be an appropriate exercise. There should be appropriate dosage or sets and reps and frequency. And it is kind of hard to get over that hurdle within our culture. We don't really think of exercise or movement or position as medicinal in our culture. Instead, we'd like to take the pill. But I'd like to, for all of you to think about, what are some basic daily movement practices or stressors that you could put on yourself? Especially right now, it's a little bit more challenging, but can you get 10,000 steps a day? Can you go from sitting to standing 50 times in a day? Those are just some simple stressors to add on to that. Now let's take a little bit of a look at medications. Another interesting study was looking at the rise in antidepressants, and they found that exercise was as effective as taking, I believe, a Zoloft in that study in treating depression. And then as you get more strenuous with the exercise, you could arguably have a greater effect on the depression. Again, back to cross-country skiing, having some of the highest cardiovascular value, it may yield some of the best results in treating depression. And now we're getting into issues with social distancing and things like that, but being a part of a group. So even though this is Zoom, you guys are a part of a group, also great for social health, which can also help to mitigate that depression that may result from loneliness. So where are we headed though? Moving forward, I don't really foresee us moving more as a society, especially now with COVID. People are inside more. Now it's getting cold. People are less motivated to go outside. But if people knew that the positive stress could be this great enhancer of your overall health, maybe they would do that more. So again, if we were walking more, would we start to see the numbers come back down in terms of chronic illnesses? I had a friend that I was running with a long while ago, and I had mentioned, there's a 63% increase in depression in America. And he said, interesting. It's like, how come we're not seeing then equal numbers with the medications? Like, why aren't we starting to see that the medicines are working and then there's a 63% decrease? How come we're not curving that trajectory? That's a great question. I don't have an answer for that, but maybe it has something to do with the lack of movement that we're doing as a society. So this is not anything new. We've been here before. So at the turn of the century, when our ancestors were coming off the farm, this is more in the industrialization period. If you look through the medical literature from around that time, a lot of doctors were reporting these odd illnesses. They didn't really have a germ or a virus or something to prescribe to it, but people are just having this general malaise. They weren't sleeping well. They were having these aches and pains, and they were attributing this a lot to the fact that people were becoming less active. They weren't working in the fields, and they were working at a desk. Not only that, they were doing the same repetitive thing. So example being the automotive industry, when you're on the line. So you're doing the same task over and over and over. And people were starting to see some illnesses from that. So Teddy Roosevelt, who was president around that time, he has an interesting history. I don't know if any of you are historians, but I've read several books about him, articles about him. And he actually struggled with health as a youth. He had asthma, and he was just kind of chronically unhealthy. And his parents provided everything they could for him, but basically when he turned around 13, 14, they were saying, look, you got to make your own body. We've done all we can for you. And he really took that to heart. And there's reports of him when he got to college, he loved boxing and wrestling and then discussing poetry afterwards. So he was very much a man of strength and mind. But he had a quote of saying, bodily vigor is a method of getting that vigor of soul, without which vigor of that body counts for nothing. And moving on to when he made it to the White House, he carried that with him. And he actually had installed on the White House grounds a tennis court. And with that tennis court, he invited other cabinet members, and they would have these tennis cabinet meetings. And he said that was the best way. They would be arguing on the tennis court while discussing American policy and how to be able to influence that policy. But he said everybody would leave feeling better, sweaty, and they got it all out on the court. And they also were able to work together to get things done. He then stressed that to Americans to try and make it their goal to stress themselves physically. JFK was another president to carry that legacy on. He went on to start the JFK 50, which is a 50-mile running race held the weekend before Thanksgiving every year outside of DC. And that was another way that he was encouraging Americans to try and push themselves for that vigor of soul. He was quoted as saying, "We want a nation of participants and a vigorous life. This is not a matter which we can be settled, of course, from Washington. It's really a matter of which starts with each individual family." And that was from him in 1961. So what are some of the words that come into your mind when you think of movement in America? And can you associate them with any other cultures? So here's just a couple examples that come to mind. I don't know if any of you are sports athletes in general, or sports fans in general. You can see that the Jamaicans, they're known as being great sprinters. The Dutch, they're really known for being great cyclists, and they bike everywhere. So driving is actually rare. The Kenyans, they're known for running long distances. Soccer is pretty much known everywhere. Samoa is known for producing tremendous NFL talent in their football. I think I heard one time they have about 50 or 60 residents who have participated in the NFL. And their nation is about the size of Lancaster City. And can you imagine walking down Lancaster City and it's like, hey, yeah, there's another NFLer. You know, that's like, wow, 60 of them in a small country or like in a small city like ours. But also Norway. Norway. They are the leaders in cross-country skiing. And I'll get into this a little bit more later. So changing culture around the world or around the movement does involve breaking mental barriers. And so let me tell you what I mean by that. So here we have two pictures. First of all, on the top left, that's Roger Bannister when he broke the 4-minute mile barrier. You know, scientists said that no human would ever be able to run faster than 4-minute miles. Like that's just where the body would top out at. So he did that in 1954. And what's really interesting about that, remember, nobody had ever done it and they said it could never be done. Well, after he did it, within a year, 24 more people went on to do it. So that tells you, like, what was there a mental block in everybody's mind because there was so much negativity saying that it can't be done? And then one person went out and said, no, it can be done. So then everybody else was like, oh, okay, well, I'll try. And then if you look back over the history books, it just expedited from there. There's many, many more people went on to do that. Now, look on the bottom right here, you have Norway. So Norway has won 107 of the total 471 medals ever awarded in the sport of cross-country skiing. That is dominance by a nation right there. And so again, I come back to that idea. In Norway, is it part of their culture? So they just have this, we could say a little bit of pride, but it's also just this mental barrier that's been broken. Like, well, yeah, we're Norway. We're good at cross-country skiing. We're good at the winter sports. Side story, my wife, she used to be a teacher at Lancaster Strasbourg High School. And one year they had an exchange student from Norway, and it was an Olympic year. And they were coming up on it for the Winter Olympics. And he was there in class. He's like, yeah, you know what? Summer Olympics don't even look for us. Like we're a small country. We do like no summer sports, but Winter Olympics, we're going to dominate. And sure enough, Norway, small nation, but they had more medals than everybody else per capita in the Winter Olympics. They are dominant. So another hurdle is that barrier of being too old to move, right? Like, oh, as you get older, you can't do as well. And that's also not true. Here up on the top left, that's a picture. His name is Jim Morris. He is since deceased, but he was a competitive bodybuilder until he was nearly 80 years old. And that picture of him is when he was in his upper 70s. Here in the center, CrossFit is another example of movement that was popular even in all age demographics. Bottom left, that's Ed Whitlock. He set a record in the marathon in the 70s and 80s age groups, being the only one, I believe, ever. At 73, he ran 356 or at 254. And when he was 85, he did a 356 marathon, which is incredible. I was looking, I did not find any dominant cross-country skier who was still setting records into their 80s, but I'm sure they exist out there, and they're probably from Norway. So in closing here, I just wanted to point out that make movement medicinal for you, right? Again, like I was saying earlier, especially during this time of COVID, it's awesome that you guys are all involved in cross-country skiing, but where can you fill the gaps? Right? So you're going out on a ski weekend. Well, during the week, can you go walk more? As I said earlier, can you get up and down out of a chair more often? That's basically a squat. Can you go up and down the stairs more often? All those things are counted as some daily positive stress, which can help to not only increase your muscle strength, but also your bones. Forgot to mention that earlier. There's a physician from, I can't remember what year, but he developed what's known as the Wolff's Law. I mean, we're talking 100 years ago. And so what the Wolff's Law states is that when bone is placed under more pressure, even gravity, then that bone reacts by growing stronger. So basically, if you think back to our bed rest study, 3 weeks would be too soon to see a change. But with less activity, bones become more brittle and more capable of breaking. Whereas just being under the stress of gravity, moving, walking, sitting and standing, that increases your bone's resistance to breaking. So remember, we are all God's masterpiece, and we are so complex and so wonderfully made. And these bodies that we have, they react so well to complex things that we put on them. So I encourage you to keep moving, keep skiing, and it's still early in winter. There's probably a lot more snow to come. And so now I'll open it up for any questions that anybody might have.
There we go.
All right.
Nice job, Justin.
Thank you.
Anyone who wants to say anything, feel free to unmute and have at it.
What exercises would you recommend for cross-country skiers to, let's say, to limber up before going out on the trail or after skiing for a day?
Well, so first of all, just right from where you're at, sitting and standing. Honestly, it's just like a great squat, right? So it's going to open up your hips a little bit. It's going to keep your knees moving well. And ankles, I guess they're not as important with something like cross-country skiing, but just being able to go through that motion several times before you even start to ski. Now, and also, I don't know where you all live, but I'm guessing you probably might have to drive somewhere to start skiing. And so that's probably why that's your greatest bang for your buck. You're working multiple muscles, multiple joints all at the same time to help to increase your blood flow to get you ready to ski better. And then afterwards, again, you're probably going to have to drive back home. But when you get home, I would say, first of all, make sure you get plenty of fluids, because that's one thing that I always hear the most about. I don't want to say like muscles are like grapes, you know, that are shriveled up into raisins once they're depleted. But honestly, it's amazing what a bottle of water will do for a high schooler or for a senior alike. You know, and being dehydrated, especially after vigorous movement in the winter, people usually don't recognize how dehydrated they become because it's not as hot and they don't really think about it as much, but the air is very dry and you can still dehydrate very easily. So I would say afterwards, really staying hydrated would be really helpful in staying loose and limber. Anybody else?
What was the term VO2? Yeah, VO2, what does that mean?
VO2 max. So that's the volume of oxygen that your body is utilizing to be able to move yourself. So for example, your body to just go for a walk does not require a whole lot of oxygen consumption. So your red blood cells carry oxygen, and that's what helps you to be able to move so well. When you stress that with something more like cross-country skiing or running or cycling, then you're going to be able to go longer and faster if you have a higher VO2 max. So somebody like a top Tour de France cyclist or a top Nordic skier, they're or even a top like Kenyan marathoner, their VO2 max is going to be off the charts. It's going to be up there near like 80. Whereas somebody who doesn't really participate in any kind of exercise and they just kind of walk around town a little bit, they're probably going to be more at like 40. So again, they're going to be short of breath faster than somebody who is kind of pushing their limits with those more cardiovascularly challenging activities, such as cross-country skiing.
How do you measure that?
That is, there's how do you measure it and how do you measure it well? There's some devices now, for example, I'm wearing a Garmin watch and it will tell me a VO2 max. I'm not sure how accurate that is though. To get a real accurate measure, you actually have to go into a lab and they're basically hook you up to a ventilator and they'll have you exercise and they're measuring the oxygen that's being consumed at various levels. So they're comparing it with heart rate and your level of intensity of exercise.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Let's see. We can't ski all the time.
Yeah.
So what cross training exercises do you recommend?
So if you can, access to walking, even on a treadmill is going to be great, especially if you put it at an incline. Because of your sport, you don't need necessarily anything with very fast movements or very strenuous movements with really heavy loads. Not that I'm saying that weightlifting would be a bad idea, but things like if you have access to a rower, treadmill, cycling, even stationary biking, anything that is going to be like this continuous movement. Swimming would be another option, but that's a little bit harder to get out to a pool. But you really just can't discount the importance of walking. It's too often I feel like people view it as, well, I could exercise or I could walk. Well, walking, what's that really good for? I'm not going to do that. And then they just discount that. But that's the wrong mindset to have. Walking is hugely beneficial. There's very little risk with it. There's little wear, but there is great gains to be had with just trying to have a daily walking routine. And I should also say that's really important, is daily. Being consistent with your exercise routine. That can really pay off in dividends then. Anything else?
Does a pulse oximeter measure anything that would be useful for exercise?
Yes, definitely. And actually, here's something else that may be a resource to look into later. There's a growing body of research and even popularity, even on the New York Times bestseller lately, about this idea of oxygen utilization and breathing. One man's name is Wim Hof. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He's based in Poland, and he now has an app, and you go on his website, and he has some breathing techniques to go through that will help to influence your pulse oximetry. I know pulse oximetry is also being used recently as a early detector of symptoms of COVID. So when people are seeing that pulse ox dive, that can be an early indicator of getting a jump on, maybe getting a closer look at that. But basically, it's measuring how well you're utilizing oxygen. So if that pulse ox number is up near 100%, well, then you're really utilizing oxygen well. And now linking that back with Wim Hof, what he's doing is really promoting breathing techniques, a lot of like diaphragmatic breathing, to be able to improve your oxygen intake. Side note, Wim Hof, it's worth a look on YouTube. There's like a 7-minute documentary about him. The guy has hiked Mount Everest in his 60s in a pair of shorts and boots, no coat, no shirt, nothing. So he's really into this idea of cold therapy and breathing. Scientists have studied him. They put him underwater in ice water, and his body temperature actually rises rather than falling. Another person is James Nestor. He wrote a book called Breathe, and that's one that was a New York Times bestseller recently. But those are some interesting resources to look into, entertaining if nothing else.
A follow-up question then.
Sure.
If you go through a period of exercise and then sit down and use your pulse oximeter, the higher the number remains, the better your use of oxygen. So that could be a target to improve that number.
Yeah. I will also say, so at our clinic, pulse oximetry is something that we measure as well as patients' temperatures when they're coming into the clinic. And I have found that very stressed out people and people who are in more pain can be low in that pulse oximetry. I had a gymnast just earlier today, and she came in and her pulse ox was at 90. And I thought, wow. But her temperature was fine, no other symptoms. And I worked with her a little bit, and she was in some chronic neck and low back pain. And so when she would take a deep breath, she was breathing all through her chest and elevating her chest, and that was hurting her low back. And so I think that's why she was having such poor oxygen utilization. She wasn't even consuming it well. Well, I measured her again within 5 minutes. She was at 100%. She was able to calm down her system. Her back pain wasn't as intense. She could breathe through her diaphragm rather than through her chest. And she had this dramatic change in her pulse ox reading.
How do you spell Winpoff to look it up on YouTube?
Okay, 2 words, Wim, W-I-M, last name Hof, H-O-F. and he's based out of Poland.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question about those pulse ox. How do they actually sense the oxygen? I just had a doctor's appointment the other day, and they put a little meter on my finger, and she read me an oxygen number, and I was just curious how they determine how the instrument determines that.
That is a great question, and I honestly, sorry, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It has something, because I will say I've noticed that hand sanitizer and really cold hands impair its ability to read. So I'm guessing it has something to do with blood flow into your fingertip.
Just for fun, Justin's too young to know this, but many of us with Highmark recently received a little healthcare kit, which included a health pulse oximeter. So it's a new toy to play with.
Yeah.
I have one on right now, and the reason I have it is because I saw on the news or online that it's a good thing to have if you start feeling sick with COVID. If your oximeter level drops below 95 into lower 90s, that's a sign that you probably should go to the hospital. If it starts to drop and even below 90, you're in dire straits. And
I didn't get one of those. Did you get a pulse oximeter?
Pulse oximeter, same thing they use at a doctor's office.
Okay.
And you can get them on Amazon. I'm trying to read Zach Vrate. I got some that weren't so good, but ZAC, capital VRAT, Zach V-Rate is what it is. I think the manufacturer.
Yeah, they're less than $20, but Highmark just sent out a package of stuff with pulse oximeter and chapstick and hand sanitizer and a whole bunch of other stuff that I figure a lot of us probably got.
And David, one more thing to mention that you said about the pulse ox. So it also records heart rate. And you asked earlier about response to exercise. So heart rate is another good measure. I love objective measures because they don't lie, right? So you can see a number. So you can see your progress and how you're responding to exercise based on your heart rate too. For example, if I'll use the treadmill example again, let's say you're doing a 15-minute walk and you got the incline at 5% and you got the speed at 2.0, and you see what your heart rate number is. You can check the oxygen too after that walk duration, and then after a week, does that number decline? That's showing your body's adapting to the stress that is being put upon it, and therefore you could either elevate it or speed it up. And again, you're trying to look at, can you go faster, longer, and have the heart rate either stay the same or decline?
Great, thanks.
Is there a place where we can get a chart that shows your age and then we used to do in aerobics class, you do a pulse check in your neck. And is that what you're talking about? So that then you would know.
Well, that would be an example of it. Yeah. But I was saying like just setting baseline. So from wherever you're at today. So let's say David, he does that with that on his finger and he sees his heart rate's at 90. Okay. That's his benchmark. Right. And so in a week from then, if he's been exercising the same for 1 week, does that number then decline? And if so, that's showing a really good positive response to exercise.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? All right.
I have a question. Are there any good stretching exercises you recommend, like before or after cross-country skiing?
There's not necessarily a really good stretch or exercise that I can really say, because not like a generalized one. Again, I would say the hydration is really key. Even something like walking afterwards. Again, you can get into some specifics for someone who tends to have a tight hip or someone has a tight ankle. But to say, is there one specific one? I can't really give you a good answer on that right now.
How about yoga?
Hey, yeah, now yoga is great, but that's not really, one thing. But yeah, yoga is a good option. I'll also say one thing that is really key is finding the thing that motivates you. Because I've had lots of people say, well, hey, what's the best thing to do? It's like, well, if somebody told me the best thing was to swim all the time, I would be in terrible shape because I never swim. I hate swimming. I can, however, be consistent with running. I like that. And so that's why for you, if you guys can find what that thing is that you like to do, that is what's going to be the best thing for you, because you'll be consistent with that. Finding that thing that motivates you. So yoga could be a great option.
If it's something outdoors, that'll motivate me.
Yeah.
The things and exercise equipment just bores me.
Yeah. Then go out. Yeah, that's a great thing to do. I'll say there is another gentleman, I can't remember. He's French. So his first name is Ewan. I want to say it's Lacour. But he's got a program called MoveNat, MoveNat. So you can look on his website. And he basically turns the wilderness into his gym. And he's got videos and things about, hey, here's a fallen log, and you kind of leap over this log. And he's got different techniques of like how to reach on this tree branch and swing over this. And, some of it may not be for you, but it's like when you mentioned that about being outside, that's one of the things that comes to mind. And, he's made a career out of finding ways to move over logs and things like that.
And what's his name?
I can't remember his name. It's Ewan. I want to say it's Lacour or Lacroix, but it's Move Natural or Move Nat, N-A-T for short.
Move Natural. Move Nat. I'll check that out.
Again, that's probably good for entertainment value, if nothing else.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
No, I think you really brought out some really good points for everybody to think about. And
great. Well, I was hope to offer some entertainment, if nothing else.
I think we all appreciate you're taking the time to emphasize the importance of movement for us all, especially as we're getting older, and it's becoming more important, I think, in many ways to keep moving.
Yeah.
And enjoy it. And I know for myself, I like the yoga and walking. That will get me going. And cross-country skiing is wonderful. If you have snow, I think it's just the peace of being in the woods and the quietness of that ski going through the snow. It's really a wonderful thing for all of us. Thanks so much, Justin, for taking time to remotivate us on our quest for good physical fitness and good health for our country, cross-country skiing. Thanks a lot for being with us.
Yeah. Keep moving, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Good night.
Good night.